Okay, so we're going to end chapter 4 on histograms, which is really what the chapter started with, and we've been looking at tons of them in all of the homework problems. But it's just one of those things that you've made stem and leaf plots before, and you've made dot plots, and you can understand how to find the mean and the median, and I showed you how to find the quartiles. All those things are kind of not as new, but histograms are brand new, at least in the creating them aspect. And you've got to use your calculator and things, so I like to reserve a day to talk about them. So a histogram is like a bar chart in that there are bars, but that's where really the similarities stop. So a bar chart is all about categories, but with a histogram, the x-axis of your histogram is a continuous numerator, okay, or numerator, a continuous number line. So you have 0, 1, 2, however you want to set that up, whatever you're counting by, whatever your data indicates, but it's continuous, all right? So in a histogram, you don't have any spaces between your bars unless there's a gap in the data. And so a gap in the data would indicate that maybe something weird is happening, okay? Now, a histogram can really look however you want it to look because you can make the widths of the bars, which we call the bin widths, anything you want, okay? You could count by 3s, you could count by 5s, you could count by 10s, you could count by 2/10, all right? So that's going to be up to you and up to your data to help you decide, and we'll do one in a little bit to look at. All right, but it's very important to understand that it's a continuous number line, so you can't just leave out data, all right? You'll have all the data, and if there's any gaps, that indicates maybe something else, okay? So here's an example. 2 researchers measured the pH of water collected from rain and snow over a 6-month period in Pennsylvania. Describe the data with a graph in a few sentences. Well, I want to go through and actually make the histogram. So it looks like my smallest data value is 4.12, and my largest data value is 5.78. So I need to make a number line. And I'm going to start at 4.1. I'm going to end at 5.8 or 5.9, right? Now, it's up to you to design how far apart your bins are. What bin being your interval? What interval of data for each bar do you want? So I could make this a 1/10, so my next number could be 4.2. Or I could do 2/10, which I think might be smarter because there's so many data values. So maybe I count by 2/10, and the next one's 4.3. Maybe you count by a half, so you could have you could go start at 4 and go to 4.5. But anything larger than that, your data is too close together to get too much larger. So you don't want to have a bin width of 1, because then all the 4s are going to go together and all the 5s are going to go together, and that's not really going to show you anything, okay? But when I'm saying that, you can see how by changing the bin width, you can change what the histogram might look like, because you can put all the data together in 2 bars, but does that really tell you anything if you had split them up into multiple bars, okay? So I'm going to go with 2/10, finish what we've got here. Now, in a perfect world, these would all be the exact same width apart from each other because you want the bars to be the same. But, you know, I'm freehanding, so we do what we can. So I'll go to 5.9 because my largest is 5.78. Now, it's very important to understand that the data values that you put into each bin can be equal to the first number, but have to be less than the second number, all right? So if you have a data point that's 4.3, it will go into the next bar. It won't be included in the first bar. So you're including the first number of your interval, but not including the second number of your interval. Now, a histogram shows frequency, so all we need to do is figure out how many data points are in each of these intervals. So the easiest thing for me to do then is I just put X's to represent a data value, and then I go back and put my bars in, all right? So 4.57 and 5.62 and 4.12, 5.29, 4.64, 4.31, 4.3, which then goes in that second bar because it has to be less than 4.3 to go in the first one, 4.39, 4.45, 5.67, 4.39, 4.52, 4.26, 4.26, 4.4, 5.78, 4.73, 4.56, 5.08, 4.41, 4.12, 5.51, 4.82, 4.63, 4.29, and 4.6. All right, so if I build my bars here, right, they're supposed to be straight and all that, I know. So that's 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is 7. This is 6, 2, 1, 1. There's a gap, so that's a little bit funky. 1, right? So I would want to have a x-axis, or y-axis, sorry, that says, your x-axis is your number line, that says the count. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is just frequency. Okay? So looking at this, I can see that my data is unimodal and skewed to the right. Okay? Now, I don't intend for you to make these by hand all the time, and then the AP exam doesn't ask you to make them by hand generally because there's so many different variations that you could get depending on your bin width. So you have to look at them like you've been doing on your homework. But I do want you to be able to look at one in your calculator in case you need to understand what the shape of something is or something like that. So instead of doing things by hand tonight in your homework, you can do them in your calculator. I have already taken the time to put all of these numbers into my list 1. So if you want to do that, you may want to pause this and put all of your numbers into list 1 so you can follow along. If not, you can just watch. So some things you need to do first. And I have a note sheet that you can get from me that tells you all these things with screenshots. But the first thing I do is go to y equals. And you want to make sure nothing is in y equals. So if there was an x squared in here because you were graphing something for some other class or last year or whatever. If you need it, say it's a long equation that you already to type in for calculus and you still need it for homework later, you don't have to delete it. You just need to turn it off. So hit enter over the equal sign and now it's not selected, so now it won't graph that function. If you don't need it at all, then just go ahead and clear it out because you don't want to graph an algebraic function over a stat function because the window will never be right. Okay? So after that, go to second y equals and you're on the stat plot menu. Most of your stat plots are going to be off, and that's okay. So on number 1, hit enter. And the first thing you want to do is you want to put your cursor on and hit enter so that you make sure that you're actually going to be plotting anything. If you do all the settings and you leave it off, you won't see anything on your graph. So make sure your stat plot is on. We're doing a histogram, so the type is the one that looks like a little histogram with the bars. So select that and hit enter as well. And then you scroll down. You're using list 1, hopefully. If you put your data values in a different list, then you need to change them, and you can do that by doing second and then the number of your list. But again, mine were in list 1. It should default to that. And then your frequency should just be 1. And you should hit graph. And you're going to see something funky, and sometimes it just shows up in the 10 by 10 window. So sometimes you get weird things. So this should become your new go-to zoom feature. All right, there's all sorts of zoom features on your calculator, but there's a specific one for stat. So you're going to hit zoom 9. So it's down here, but instead of scrolling down every time, I always just hit zoom 9. If you hit zoom 9, then you get a better picture, and everything is kind of centered in your window. Now it looks pretty similar to the one I have, but I want you to know that your calculator has an algorithm for how it figures out the bin widths to make them all proportional, and they don't always make sense. So I want you to do next is go to the window, and we're going to change some settings. So right now, look, this X scale, that means your intervals is 0.276 repeating. That doesn't make much sense. So I'm going to change it to how I did the one by hand. So I'm going to change it to 0.2. My X-min is giving me the minimum value in my data set, but I didn't use the minimum value in my data set. I just used 4.1. So you can change those as well, and then your X max will adjust itself. Okay? So again, hit graph. And now it's adjusted itself, and it looks pretty much identical to mine, like it should, right? Some other features, if you hit trace, the cursor's on top of the bar. The N tells you how many data points are in that bar, and the min and max tell you the interval that the data points are in between. Okay? But it's important to note that you can change those scales however you want, because I can make this look differently depending on what I put in here. I could change this to 0.5, and I can hit zoom 9, right? And so now it looks like there's no gaps in the data, right? I can change this to, oh yeah, don't ever hit zoom 9 again. I did that myself. Okay, so there we go. If you hit zoom 9, then you're going to have it go back to where you had the 0.276 repeating. So don't do that. But so now I can see that this first bar has 15 numbers in it, and then this one has 6. So now I'm kind of putting all my data in big chunks. So maybe I don't want to do that. I could change the scale to 0.1. Well, now there's tons of bars, so I can kind of change things up to make them look a little bit different. So make sure you're choosing an appropriate scale, and you're making note of that when you do make a histogram in your calculator, so that you don't make those mistakes that I made when hitting zoom 9 again and trying to figure some things out. Just kind of figure out some things on your own instead of letting your calculator do all the work for you. All right, so one more example. This goes along with the birds stem and leaf plot you did the other night. And it says they told them to make a histogram of the data instead, and they got this graph. So some problems with this graph. There are spaces. All these spaces are bad. And there's spaces because they did a bar chart based on site number, which is categorical. So they've done a bar chart and not a histogram. If you're going to do a histogram, you would do the number of bird sightings as a continuous number line, okay? So think about that when you're looking at them. Also, some other things that could be wrong with histograms. The bin widths are inappropriate, that kind of thing. So make sure you're looking closely at your graphs. And then one more thing I wanted to show you. In your calculators, we talked about yesterday that you could do one variable statistics, and there was a frequency list. Well, in this chart right here, it's giving you the frequency of people that are a certain height. And that means that technically you would need to type in 60 twice, and 61 6 times, which gets tedious, and really tedious when it says 65 20 times. So I want to show you that really fast. So second quit out of your graph. If I go to Stat Edit, I'm going to clear this out. I can type in this table exactly how it is. 60, 61, 62, not 622, 63, and then give those frequencies. And then I can go to Stat Calc one variable statistics, but give the frequency list as list 2. Then it calculates the mean and the standard deviation and the median and all those things based on the fact that there are 2 60s and 6 61s. It calculates all that for you without having to type everything in individually. So that's what that frequency list does. I know I mentioned it briefly yesterday, so I wanted to give you an example. So I'll give you the assignment, but otherwise, hopefully this will help with how to make some histograms and clear some things up about Chapter 4.